Ozzy Osbourne delivered a final message to James Hetfield. What he told will break your heart. Just 5 days before his death on July 22, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne made one of the most emotionally devastating phone calls of his final weeks, reaching out to Metallica frontman James Hetfield with a message so profound and heartbreaking that it has left the metal legend struggling to find words to describe the experience. In an exclusive and deeply emotional interview, Hetfield has finally broken his silence about this extraordinary conversation, revealing details that will forever change how the world understands both Ozzy's final days and the profound impact he had on the musicians who followed in his footsteps. What the Prince of Darkness shared with Hetfield during their last conversation touches on legacy, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds forged through the power of heavy metal music. Speaking from Metallica's headquarters in San Rafael, California, Hetfield appears visibly moved as he recalls the unexpected call that came on July 17, 2025. I was in the studio working on some new material when my phone rang. When I saw Ozzy's name on the screen, my first thought was that Sharon was calling to update me on his condition. But when I answered, it was Ozzy himself, and his voice had this clarity and strength that I hadn't heard from him in months. He said, "James, I need to talk to you about something important, something I should have told you years ago." I immediately knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. The relationship between Ozzy and Hetfield had spanned over 4 decades, beginning in the early 1980s, when a young Metallica was just starting to make their mark on the metal scene. Ozzy had been one of the first established metal legends to recognize Metallica's potential, inviting them to open for him during his 1986 tour. That tour changed everything for us, Hetfield recalls. Ozzy didn't just give us a platform, he treated us like family. He would spend hours backstage talking to us about music, about the business, about life. He became a mentor and a father figure to all of us, but especially to me. What made Ozzy's final call so extraordinary was the vulnerability and honesty he displayed, stripping away decades of public persona to share his deepest thoughts about his career, his legacy, and his relationship with the younger generation of metal musicians he had inspired. He started by telling me that he'd been thinking about all the people who had been important to him throughout his career, and that he needed to make sure I understood how much our friendship had meant to him, Hetfield explains. But then he said something that completely caught me off guard. "James, I need you to know that watching you overcome your struggles with addiction and find peace in your life has been one of the greatest sources of hope I've had in my final years. If you're already moved by this opening revelation, please hit that like button, because what Ozzy shared next will absolutely shatter your heart." According to Hetfield, Ozzy's message became increasingly personal as he revealed how closely he had followed Metallica's journey, particularly Hetfield's own battles with alcoholism and his eventual recovery. He told me that when I went to rehab in 2001, it gave him hope that recovery was possible, even for people like us, people who had used substances to cope with the pressures and traumas of this lifestyle. He said that seeing me come back stronger, seeing me rebuild my relationships with my family and bandmates, had inspired him during his own darkest moments. The conversation took an emotionally devastating turn when Ozzy began to share his deepest regrets about his own relationship with his children and how he wished he could have followed Hetfield's example in prioritizing family over career chaos. He broke down completely when he started talking about his kids, Hetfield recalls, his own voice breaking with emotion. He said that watching me balance being a father with being in Metallica had shown him what was possible, but that he felt like he'd learned that lesson too late. He kept saying, "James, you figured out how to be both the man and the musician. I never learned that balance." Ozzy's message continued with shocking revelations about how Hetfield's music and personal journey had influenced his own final years. He told me that he'd been listening to our albums differently in recent months, hearing them not just as music, but as documentation of emotional growth and healing. He said that songs like The Unforgiven and Fade to Black had helped him process his own feelings about mortality and redemption. Coming from Ozzy, someone who had been making profound music since before Metallica even existed, that was incredibly humbling. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of Ozzy's message involved his fears about how he would be remembered and his hope that the next generation of metal musicians would learn from his mistakes. He said he was terrified that his legacy would be defined by the wild behavior and the scandals, rather than the music and the positive impact he'd tried to have on people's lives. He asked me to promise that I would help carry forward the true spirit of heavy metal, the power to help people feel less alone, to give voice to pain and anger in a way that heals rather than destroys. Hetfield reveals that Ozzy also shared deeply personal insights about the creation of some of Black Sabbath's most influential songs and how they had been born from genuine pain and struggle rather than a desire to shock or entertain. He talked about writing Iron Man and Paranoid and War Pigs, these songs that became the foundation of everything we do in metal. He said they weren't trying to create a genre or start a movement. They were just four working-class kids from Birmingham trying to make sense of a world that seemed dark and hopeless. The heaviness of the music matched the heaviness of their lives. Whoa, the conversation became even more emotional when Ozzy revealed how proud he was of the way Metallica had evolved and matured while staying true to their metal roots. He said that watching us grow from angry young men into thoughtful artists and fathers had given him hope for the future of heavy metal. He felt like we had proven that you could be heavy and meaningful, that you could address serious topics without losing the power and intensity that defines the genre. According to Hetfield, one of the most shocking revelations was Ozzy's admission that he had been secretly following Metallica's career moves and business decisions, learning from their approach to maintaining creative control and artistic integrity. He told me that he'd studied how we handled the transition from the underground to mainstream success, how we managed to stay authentic while reaching a massive audience. He said he wished he'd had our business sense and our unity as a band during his prime years. The message took another devastating turn when Ozzy began to share his thoughts about mortality and what he hoped would happen to his music after his death. He said he wasn't afraid of dying, but he was afraid of being forgotten or misunderstood. He wanted the music to outlive the mythology, wanted people to connect with the emotional truth in the songs, rather than just the shock value of his persona. He asked me to help make sure that happened. Hetfield discloses that Ozzy also shared specific instructions about how he wanted to be honored after his death, requests that went far beyond traditional memorial services. He said he didn't want people to mourn him. He wanted them to celebrate the power of music to transform pain into something beautiful. He asked me to make sure that any tributes focused on the music and its impact on people's lives, rather than on his personal struggles or wild behavior. The conversation revealed Ozzy's deep knowledge of and respect for Metallica's entire catalog, including their most personal and introspective material. He talked about specific songs and what they meant to him, how they had helped him understand his own emotions and experiences. He mentioned one, and how it had made him think about the veterans in his own family. He talked about Nothing Else Matters, and how it had shown him that heavy music could be tender and vulnerable. This was someone who really understood what we were trying to accomplish as artists. According to Hetfield, one of the most profound aspects of Ozzy's message was his reflection on the responsibility that comes with being a voice for people who feel marginalized or misunderstood. He said that being in a position to influence young people through music was both a privilege and a burden. He felt like he hadn't always lived up to that responsibility, that he'd sometimes prioritized entertainment over meaning. He wanted me to remember that every song we write, every performance we give, has the potential to change someone's life. The call took another emotional turn when Ozzy began to share memories of specific moments from their friendship over the years, moments that had meant more to him than Hetfield had realized at the time. He remembered conversations we'd had backstage 20 years ago, advice he'd given me about dealing with the pressures of fame, times when I'd supported him through difficult periods. He had this incredible memory for the human connections, the real moments of friendship that had happened between the chaos of touring and recording. Hetfield reveals that Ozzy also expressed deep admiration for Lars Ulrich, Kirk Hammett, and Robert Trujillo, sharing specific observations about each member's contributions to Metallica's sound and success. He talked about Lars's drive and business acumen, Kirk's melodic sensibility and technical skill, and Robert's positive energy and musical versatility. He said that watching us work together as a unit had reminded him of the early days of Black Sabbath, when they were four friends creating something revolutionary together. The conversation became increasingly profound as Ozzy shared his thoughts about the spiritual dimension of heavy metal music and its power to provide comfort and catharsis for people dealing with difficult emotions. He said that the heaviest music often comes from the most pain, but that when it's done right, it transforms that pain into something healing. He felt like metal had become a form of therapy for millions of people, a way to process anger and sadness and fear in a healthy way. According to Hetfield, one of the most shocking aspects of Ozzy's message was his admission that he had been secretly battling depression and suicidal thoughts throughout his career, and how seeing other metal musicians find ways to cope and heal had given him hope. He said that watching me go through rehab and come out stronger had shown him that it was possible to face your demons and win. He said that the vulnerability I'd shown in talking about my struggles had made him feel less alone in his own battle with mental health issues. The call reached its emotional climax when Ozzy shared what he considered to be his most important piece of advice for the next generation of metal musicians. He said, "James, promise me that you'll tell young musicians that it's possible to be heavy and healthy, angry and stable, dark and hopeful all at the same time. The music doesn't require you to destroy yourself. In fact, the music is better when it comes from a place of healing rather than a place of self-destruction." Hetfield reveals that Ozzy also shared his thoughts about the current state of heavy metal and his optimism about its future, particularly because of bands like Metallica, who had proven that the genre could evolve and endure. He said he was proud of how metal had grown and diversified, how it had influenced other genres and reached new audiences. He felt like the foundation that Black Sabbath had laid was strong enough to support whatever came next. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Ozzy revealed that he had been secretly writing letters to various metal musicians over the past year, sharing his thoughts and feelings about their contributions to the genre. He told me that he'd written to everyone from Tony Iommi to newer artists like Spiritbox and Architects, telling them how their music had affected him and what he hoped they would accomplish in the future. He said he'd been trying to build bridges between generations of metal musicians to create a sense of continuity and community that would outlast any individual career. According to Hetfield, Ozzy also confessed that he had been struggling with feelings of irrelevance in his final years, wondering if his style of metal was still meaningful to younger generations. He said that seeing bands like us continue to draw massive crowds and influence new artists had reassured him that the core values of heavy metal, authenticity, emotional honesty, the power to unite people through shared experiences of struggle, were still relevant and important. The conversation became even more personal when Ozzy revealed specific regrets about his relationships with other metal pioneers and his hopes for reconciliation even after death. He talked about feuds and misunderstandings with other musicians that had lasted for decades, relationships that had been damaged by ego and competition. He said he hoped that his death might inspire people to put aside old grudges and remember what they had in common rather than what divided them. Hetfield discloses that Ozzy also shared his thoughts about the role of metal music in addressing social and political issues, and how he regretted not using his platform more effectively to promote positive change. He said that looking back, he wished he had been more conscious about the messages in his music and more active in supporting causes he believed in. He felt like his generation of metal musicians had focused too much on rebellion and not enough on building something better. According to Hetfield, one of the most moving aspects of their conversation was Ozzy's reflection on the fans who had supported him throughout his career and how their loyalty had sustained him through his darkest periods. He said that every letter from a fan who said his music had helped them through difficult times, every person who approached him to share their story, had been a reminder that his life had meaning beyond his personal struggles. He wanted me to make sure that metal musicians never forget that they're not just entertainers. They're lifelines for people who need to know they're not alone. The call took another profound turn when Ozzy shared his thoughts about death and what he hoped to find on the other side. He said he'd been thinking a lot about Randy Rhoads and other friends he'd lost over the years, and he hoped that death would give him the chance to apologize to people he'd hurt and to finally be free from the pain that had followed him throughout his life. But he also said he wasn't ready to let go completely, that he hoped his spirit would somehow be able to continue supporting the metal community even after his body was gone. Hetfield reveals that Ozzy also asked him to take on specific responsibilities within the metal community, requests that went far beyond simply continuing to make music. He asked me to help mentor younger bands, to share the business knowledge and life experience that had taken us decades to accumulate. He said that the metal community needed elder statesmen who could guide the next generation without trying to control or compete with them. The conversation reached another emotional peak when Ozzy revealed how much Metallica's documentary, Some Kind of Monster, had meant to him and how it had influenced his own approach to dealing with personal and professional challenges. He said that watching us work through our conflicts and personal issues in such a public way had shown him that it was possible to be vulnerable and honest without losing respect or credibility. He said it had inspired him to be more open about his own struggles in his final years. According to Hetfield, Ozzy also shared specific memories of their collaborations over the years, including tours, award shows, and informal jam sessions that had meant more to him than Hetfield had realized. He remembered every detail of our interactions, conversations about songwriting, advice about dealing with the music industry, moments of camaraderie that had happened in the midst of the chaos of rock and roll life. It was clear that these relationships had been among the most meaningful aspects of his career. The call took yet another emotional turn when Ozzy revealed his thoughts about the evolution of metal production and how modern technology had changed the way heavy music was created and consumed. He said he was amazed by what younger bands were able to accomplish with digital recording and social media, but he also worried that some of the human connection and raw emotion that defined early metal was being lost in the pursuit of technical perfection. Hetfield discloses that Ozzy also shared his thoughts about the global reach of heavy metal and how proud he was that music born in working-class Birmingham had touched lives around the world. He talked about receiving letters from fans in countries he'd never visited, people who had found hope and strength in metal music, despite living in completely different circumstances. He said that knowing his music had transcended cultural and geographical boundaries was one of his greatest sources of pride. The conversation became even more intimate when Ozzy revealed details about his daily routine in his final months and how he had been using his limited energy to focus on what mattered most. He told me that he'd been waking up every morning with a list of people he wanted to reach out to, things he wanted to say before it was too late. He said that knowing his time was limited had given him clarity about what was truly important: relationships, love, making amends, and ensuring that his life's work would continue to help people after he was gone. According to Hetfield, Ozzy also shared his thoughts about the role of pain and struggle in creating authentic art, and how he hoped younger musicians would learn to channel their difficulties in healthy ways. He said that suffering was an inevitable part of the human experience, but that the goal shouldn't be to escape from it or to glorify it. Instead, he felt that artists had a responsibility to transform their pain into something that could help others heal and grow. The conversation took another deeply personal turn when Ozzy revealed his thoughts about his relationship with Sharon and how grateful he was for her unwavering support throughout their marriage. He said that Sharon had been not just his wife and manager, but his anchor to reality when the chaos of fame threatened to completely consume him. He talked about how she had saved his life multiple times, both literally and figuratively, and how much he regretted the pain his struggles had caused her. Hetfield reveals that Ozzy also shared his hopes for how his children would remember him and continue his legacy. He said that he hoped his kids would focus on the love he had for them, rather than on his failures as a father. He wanted them to understand that every mistake he'd made, every time he'd been absent or unreliable, had been about his own demons, and never about a lack of love for them. The conversation reached another emotional climax when Ozzy shared his thoughts about the meaning of legacy and what he hoped to leave behind. He said that he'd come to realize that legacy wasn't about fame or record sales or awards. It was about the lives you touch and the positive changes you inspire in the world. He hoped that his music would continue to help people feel less alone, that his story would show others that redemption was possible even after making terrible mistakes. According to Hetfield, Ozzy also revealed that he had been working on a secret project in his final months, a series of recordings and writings specifically designed to help people struggling with addiction and mental health issues. He said he'd been collaborating with therapists and counselors to create resources that would use his experiences to help others avoid the same pitfalls. He wanted his pain to serve a purpose, to prevent other people from going through what he'd endured. The call took another profound turn when Ozzy shared his thoughts about the importance of authenticity in music and how he hoped the metal community would continue to value honesty over commercial success. He said that the music industry's tendency to package and market artists had always troubled him because it encouraged musicians to create personas rather than to express their genuine selves. He felt that metal's greatest strength was its commitment to emotional truth, and he hoped that would never change. Hetfield discloses that Ozzy also shared his observations about the changing nature of fame and celebrity in the digital age, and how he worried about the impact on younger artists. He said that social media and constant connectivity had made fame more invasive and less sustainable than it had been in his generation. He was concerned that young musicians weren't getting the privacy and time they needed to develop their craft and their identities before being thrust into the spotlight. The conversation became even more emotionally charged when Ozzy revealed his deepest fears about dying and his hopes for what would come after. He said that despite all the darkness he'd explored in his music and his life, he was fundamentally hopeful about what awaited him after death. He believed that consciousness continued in some form, and he hoped to be reunited with the people he'd lost over the years. But he also said he was afraid of leaving unfinished business, of dying before he'd made all the amends he needed to make. According to Hetfield, one of the most powerful moments in their conversation came when Ozzy asked him to help preserve not just his musical legacy, but the values and principles that had guided his later years. He said that he wanted people to remember that change was possible at any age, that it was never too late to become a better person. He felt that his journey from self-destruction to self-acceptance could inspire others who felt trapped by their past mistakes. The conversation reached its final emotional peak when Ozzy asked Hetfield to deliver specific messages to other metal musicians and to the broader metal community. He wanted me to tell everyone that the metal family is real, that the bonds between musicians and fans in this genre are deeper and more meaningful than in any other form of music. He said that taking care of each other, supporting each other through struggles, celebrating each other's successes, was just as important as making great music. According to Hetfield, the call ended with Ozzy expressing gratitude for their friendship and for the impact Metallica had on his life, rather than the other way around. He thanked me for showing him that it was possible to age gracefully in this business, to maintain relevance and respect without compromising your values or your health. He said that knowing there were people like us carrying the torch forward made him feel peaceful about leaving. In the final moments of their conversation, Ozzy shared what Hetfield describes as his most profound insight about the nature of music and its power to transcend individual mortality. He said that songs are like children. Once you release them into the world, they take on a life of their own and touch people in ways you never intended or imagined. He felt that in creating music that had helped millions of people, he had achieved a form of immortality that was more meaningful than any monument or memorial. The impact of this final conversation on Hetfield has been profound and lasting. That call changed my understanding of legacy, of responsibility, of what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. Ozzy spent his final days thinking not about what he was losing, but about what he was leaving behind and who would carry it forward. That's not just inspiring, it's transformative. Hetfield concludes his revelation with a commitment to honor Ozzy's final wishes and to share his message with the broader metal community. Ozzy asked me to make sure people understand that heavy metal at its best is about transformation, taking pain and anger and fear and turning them into something powerful and healing. That's his legacy, and that's what we need to preserve and protect. Every time we step on stage, every time we write a song, every time we interact with fans, we're carrying forward the spirit that Ozzy and Black Sabbath created over 50 years ago. If this incredible revelation about Ozzy's final message to James Hetfield has moved you as much as it has moved us, please show your support by hitting that like button. The conversation between these two metal legends reminds us that the most important aspect of any musical legacy isn't the fame or the accolades, but the human connections forged through shared understanding of music's power to heal and transform. Ozzy's final message proves that even in his last days, he was still thinking about others, still trying to use his influence to make the world a better place through the power of heavy metal music.